Welcome to our study in the book of Genesis. Thank you so much for being here. We're in Genesis chapter 35, kind of a mixed matched kind of material. We're going to do some traveling, we're going to have some deaths, going to have a birth, and kind of an interesting chapter. And so let's just jump into that. Genesis 35. Having trouble with my clicker. I think I'm going to have to buy a new one. I guess I say that every week, don't I? But it's time. We're going to do it. We're going to get us a new one, I think. Where did God tell Jacob to go? That's going to be a big deal with regards to the opening part of this chapter. And then we're actually going to lose a patriarch at the end of the chapter. So there are your 10 questions if you're part of the School of Biblical Studies, or if you're just studying this on your own and want to stick along with me in your own personal Bible studies, etc., which is awesomely cool. And that would really, really impress me if you did that. Here's the review again. Chapter 1, creation. 2, retelling. Fall of man. Chapter 3, Cain kills Abel. In chapter 4, 5, Adam to Noah. 6, we're going to get the instructions to build the big boat, which he does. And then in chapter 7, we got the flood. 8, we got the birds that are sent out, raven and the dove. So we're allowed to get off the big boat. And then we're going to have the covenant that is going to be made between Noah and God, as well as God and the earth. Noah and his folks, they disperse across the see that map there? I thought that was a pretty good clue. But some of them stick around. They go to the Tower of Babel. God doesn't like it, and so he has to confuse their languages. Abraham's told to go to the city, to the Canaan land, chapter 12, 13. Too much stuff, so they have to separate. That is Adam and Lot. And Adam has to rescue his nephew in chapter 14, 15, and 17. Big chapter with regards to the covenant. In between, you got 16, which is the birth of Ishmael. Abraham's going to get 3 visitors checking out Sodom. It really is that bad. And so what we got to do is we got to destroy it. And they did. Abraham is going to give that half-truth about Sarah being his sister, birth of Isaac. That is going to carry through all the way to today's chapter that we're talking about, because in today's chapter, Isaac is going to die. But here we got the birth of Isaac. Then Abraham is told that he's supposed to sacrifice Isaac on the altar. Sarah dies, wife for Isaac, and come on, there you go. Then midway through, Abraham dies, Jacob and Esau are born. Isaac's going to be blessed by God. Isaac is going to be tricked by Jacob into giving up Esau's blessing. Jacob has to leave camp. Now, at this particular point, we're going to lose Isaac for a little while. We're not going to talk a lot about him. It's going to be primarily talking about Jacob. But here we got Jacob's ladder. That is going to play into our clue for the day. So watch that Jacob's ladder illustration here. It's also going to be in our clue, because at Bethel he is to honor the same God that he met when he left camp years ago. And Jacob's going to marry. Remember, he has to flee camp, and he goes to Uncle Laban. He gets Uncle Laban's 2 daughters, and so he's got 2 wives now. He wasn't really intending for that to happen, but Uncle Laban's not a very honest fellow. Chapter 30, we've got 11 sons of Jacob, and by the way, in our chapter we're going to get that 12th son born. Chapter 30, what is that? That's 32, right? So that's 33, so that's 31. Well, of course, that's a 1, Sonny. 31, Jacob flees with his family. Now, this time he's fleeing home. He's going back. Jacob becomes Israel. Jacob reunites with Esau unexpectedly. Things work out. He didn't expect that, but it did. Dinah is humiliated. Remember, we talked about that, kind of a sensitive chapter last week. And here we are today. Jacob goes to Bethel, which, by the way, means house of God. And Isaac and Rachel, remember, Isaac and Rebekah. That's the Isaac's married to Rebekah. Jacob's married to Rachel. I always get those messed up. But anyhow, Isaac's going to die, and Rachel, the favored wife of Jacob, is also going to pass away. You can see with the clue, here we've got Jacob, and all that. And here you see that same thing that's supposed to represent the ladder into heaven, etc. And we're going to have a reference to that in our chapter. This is the 5 made up of the ha-ha-ha-ha-has, which is the name Isaac. Here's the rip. Rest in peace. That Isaac is going to die. But you also notice that the 5 is also covering over the ring. 1 ring, that's Rachel. She is going to die. All right, moving then into our memory verse. Verse 1 is a really good one for you to memorize to understand this particular chapter. God said to Jacob, "Rise, go to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So come back to our clue, who appeared to you. Remember the ladder into heaven, all that, okay? And so remember all that. That's the clue, and it's a pretty complicated clue. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but remember that one, and it'll help you to understand what chapter 35 is about. Make an altar, etc. So there's your memory verse for this fine day. Okay. All right. There's my good friend Debbie. She's down in Louisiana. They're facing that hurricane, Category 4 hurricane coming on shore. We're here as long as we have internet and electricity. Well, God bless you. I appreciate you for being here. Hang in with me, and you'll be certainly a primary target of our prayer time here in just a little bit, Debbie. All right, moving now into our passage time, the text, if I can. There we go, 35:1. God says to Jacob, he says, arise, go to Bethel and dwell there. Remember, Bethel means house of God. Go there and dwell. Make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Now, again, that's our memory verse. I've already read this like 3 times. But it's important that we establish what we're starting out at, all right? So, essentially, remember when you left? Well, it's time to go back and remember what kept you, who kept you during all of those years that you were away. So, you're going to return to Bethel. But it's interesting to me in verse 2 and following what Jacob does. Now, I'm not saying that God didn't tell him this. He might have. But what Jacob does here, if he took initiative, and that might very well be the case as well, he's going to honor the holiness of God. Okay, very, very important. There's my buddy Darren all the way up there in Indiana land. I appreciate you. And Zion, and then Sonia. I don't know who else is watching. Thank you guys for watching. I love you guys. All right. So Jacob is going to say to his household, he's going to say, look, folks, here's what we need to do. Put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. I just find that to be a really cool initiative. We're going to go to the house of God. We're going to go to where I will establish an altar that acknowledges the God that kept me safe. I wouldn't even know you people if it hadn't been for this God. If it hadn't been for this God, I wouldn't have the 2 wives and all the sons and all the stuff that I... So we're going to go honor this God. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to put away our foreign gods. Now, the reason that's interesting is because you might recall that Rachel stole some of the idols that when she left her daddy's house, because her daddy didn't treat them well, she stole some of those. You might remember that story back prior to this. Well, we're going to take that. We're putting all that away. Then he says, arise and go up to Bethel. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me ever wherever I have gone. So this is quite a tribute to God. He's there in my distress whenever I got problems, and he is with me to this very day. Can you say that about God in your life? I certainly can about God in my life. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. A couple things there that's kind of interesting. First of all, remember the foreign gods. I already told you about Rachel stealing those. So evidently those were among the ones that we're going to bury beneath that tree. Okay. Also, notice the idea of the rings in their ears. So evidently, earrings had an association with foreign gods back in the day. I'm not saying that that's a thing today. I'm just saying that back in the day, there evidently was an association. You might recall that when the children of Israel come out of Egypt and they are going to take all of their jewelry and stuff and give it to Aaron, he's going to make that golden calf. You might recall that in that case, there's also, it seems to be, a direct connection between the jewelry and idolatry. Okay, and so it's just a thought. What is it? Peter, I believe Peter said, was it 1 Peter 3? I'm guessing now. This is all, I'm off script here. I think it's 1 Peter chapter 3. Talks about the adornment of a woman and that it's really about her inward beauty. I don't believe that passage necessarily condemns makeup and jewelry and that kind of thing, but I think we have to be really careful with vanity as we go that direction. Well, in this chapter 35 and verse 4, he seems to make a direct connection between the earrings and these foreign gods. Whatever that is, Jacob's going to take them and he is going to hide them underneath that tree. Now, why did he put them there? Why didn't he destroy them? I don't know. Was he thinking maybe someday if I need a little booty, I can go back and get them? I don't know. But there's no indication that he did, as far as I know. And so that's where he's going to hide them. They're underneath that tree in Shechem. That was near Shechem, I should say. Verse 5. And as they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. It's interesting. Remember what has happened in the previous chapter. Jacob's sons were not exactly nice guys when it comes, well, you know, and I'm not saying that justice wasn't served, but boy, it seems extreme. Remember what happens? The man rapes Dinah. It's their little sister. We ain't having it. Convinces them to get circumcised while they're still recovering from that very painful surgery. Two of the brothers go in there and just kill them all. And then the rest of the brothers go in and they take all the stuff. And, well, Jacob's going to say, boy, you guys have made me a stink in the area. A lot of folks don't like me now because of what you have done here. So we need to move out of here. Well, while they're moving, God protects them by a terror that falls upon the cities. And so whether it's warranted or not, as far as the numbers that Jacob had, it said whether it's warranted or not, God made sure that they feared them, Jacob and his company. Same type of thing was promised by God with the children of Israel as they went into the promised land. And they're retaking it at this particular point. If you will just follow me, if you'll have faith in me, I'll go ahead of you. Like hornets going in there, and I'll just clean the place out. When they first came to the border, if they had just had faith, instead of believing in the 10 that were unfaithful, if they had believed in the 2, Joshua and Caleb, if they had believed in them and had faith and got it, but remember what the 10 said? Oh, they're like giants. We can never whoop up on those people. God wants us to go in there and take over a land that is just impossible to conquer. And so God makes them wander for 40 years in the wilderness till that generation dies off. If they had just paid attention at the front end, God says, I'll go before you, and essentially, I'll wipe out the people. I'll scare the people out of here. What they could have done, if they had paid attention and had faith, they could have walked in to homes that were completely built, cities that were completely ready to be inhabited. They could have just taken over. That was God's plan. But they didn't have faith, wander for 40 years. When they finally get back and Joshua has to lead them in, now at this point, they got to do the fighting on their own primarily. Yeah, I don't know, primarily. But they had to do a lot of fighting on their own. God didn't just go in and wipe out the people. I say that because remember Jericho? God did a lot of whooping up in Jericho when he made the walls fall down. All right, but that's getting in the future, folks. We can't cover that right now. That's in the future. Okay, that's not even in the book of Genesis. All right, so he's going to send a terror into the hearts of the leaders of these cities, and they're not going to pursue Jacob and his sons, okay? And Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel. That's why Bethel's a big deal in the front end of this chapter, which is the land in the land of Canaan. And you might remember all the way back when Abraham was promised to, go there and I'll give you this land, okay? And he and all of his people were with him. And there he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, okay? Because their God had revealed himself to him when he had fled from his brother. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried under an oak below Bethel. Seems to be a lot of emphasis on trees back in the day. You might recall that. We've had one of those, every once in a while, there's kind of a geographical landmark that has to do with trees, And up here we got the terebinth tree, down here we got an oak tree, etc. Well, Deborah, who is Rebekah's nurse, now let's get this straight again. Rebekah would be Isaac's wife, right? And so she is going to pass away, and that makes the news in the scriptures, so it's very important. She passed away, and we're going to bury her here. So it's called, so he called the name Alon Bakuth. God appeared to Jacob again. Now, this is not redundant, because redundancy has to do with saying things over and over again, or at least it implies saying things over and over again. And it almost gets wearisome. But what we're going to see here is another repeat of the promise. Now, this isn't redundant in that sense, in the mundane sense, because this promise is absolutely essential to the coming of the Christ. And we're still in the opening years of us recognizing the establishment of that covenant all the way back there, you might recall, with Abraham. Okay, so now we've had Abraham, he passed it on to Isaac, Isaac passes it on to Jacob. Now we're going to have this retelling of the covenant. Your name is Jacob, but no longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel. Now remember, his name was changed earlier when he wrestled with the angel, okay? But evidently he's not been really functioning underneath that name. until this point when God says, no, from this point on, I want you to be acknowledged as Israel. Okay, let me turn that air conditioner back on. I need that thing right now. We're in Northeast Arkansas, and it's cooling off because of that hurricane down there in the Gulf, but it's not cooling off quick enough for old Sonny Childs. So your name is not going to be Jacob no more. It's going to be Israel. So mark that down. So he called his name Israel. And God said to him, here's that repeat, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. That's interesting that promise will be made here. That promise has already been made prior to this. It's been made originally with Adam and Eve. You might recall that. It's also made with Noah and Mrs. Noah. And now we got it here with Jacob. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. That's essentially the same promise that was made to Abraham. You are going to become a great nation. Then the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and will give the land to your offspring after you. And so now we've got the land promise. It's not just that you're going to have a power promise, as far as having kings that come from you, but you're also going to have a land promise. And that land promise is this place right here, where that stuff I gave originally to Abraham, passed it on to Isaac, and now it's coming to you, son. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. Powerful verse. All I know to do is let your mind go here. How did God appear? I don't know. It doesn't say. There are other references of God appearing, and we see, in the descriptions of what it looked like and how they felt and all that, but we don't know. All we know is that God did appear, and at this particular point, it says that he went up from him. Kind of almost reminiscent. I guess it can't be reminiscent if it's something in the future, but it reminds us of how Jesus ascends from the earth, okay? But anyhow, he goes up from him in the place where he had spoken to him. And so there was this meeting between God and Jacob. Wow, how powerful that is. But remember, he's also done it with Isaac, and he's also done it with Abraham. That's why we call it the patriarchal age. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone. And what's going to happen here is that this pillar is going to become a place of offering, okay? This is different from an idol. This is not supposed to represent God. This is a place that represents a place where God is worshipped, okay? And so there's a pillar of stone, and he's going to pour a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. That's interesting that a drink offering, whenever you think of offerings in the Old Testament, typically we think of an animal sacrifice, do we not? But you know, there were several kinds of offerings. Here's one, the idea of a drink offering. David will do this many years from now when you might recall he's camping outside, I believe, the city of Bethlehem, and he's looking down in the valley at the well that he used to drink out of, no doubt, as a boy, and he's just kind of wondering out loud how neat it would be to have a drink from that well. But the enemy is down there in the valley, and he knows he can't get it, but some of his mighty men actually break through the lines. They run up to the well, they get him water, bring it back to David. David is so impressed that they love him so much that they would risk their lives to get him a drink of water that he can't drink it. And so it says in that passage that he pours it out as a drink offering to the Lord, which is much more honorable than even drinking it himself, giving it to God, the one who supplies us with all needs. Well, here we're going to have that same idea. He's going to pour out a drink offering. There's also a wave offering, I'm told. Anyhow, there's several kinds of offerings. So Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken to him, or with him, Bethel, house of God. Then they journeyed from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel is the favored wife of Jacob. Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, do not fear, for you have another son. Now, pause before you go on too much into the story, because it's a sad ending. But notice that Rachel is going to bring in to the world the 12th son of Jacob. It's a big deal, because this 12th son is going to round out the 12 that becomes a very important Jewish number from here all the way through, even in the book of Revelation. And so the 12th son is going to be brought into the world, and she's going to call him Benoni. But his father Jacob's actually going to call him Benjamin. And that's the name that's going to stick throughout history, okay? So do not fear, you have another son. And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Benoni. So she dies in childbirth, and which is if you think about it, Rachel had there were a lot of difficulties with regards to Rachel and all that goes on there. The two big ones, of course, is that she is loved originally by Jacob, but her daddy gives her sister first of all. That had to, I would think, be a heartache for Rachel when she knows she was the one who was favored. All through, she struggles to kind of compete with her sister with regards to giving birth to children, that kind of thing. At one point, she's even given her handmaiden to her husband. That seems to be a historical problem as well. But eventually, she gets to have Joseph, and now she gives the second child, Benjamin. And both of these are going to be very, very primary to our next story as we begin to see Joseph's going to be sold into slavery. You might remember that. And then after a long while, they think he's dead, etc. We're going to eventually have Benjamin is going to be called to Egypt. And so the two favored sons are in play with regards to saving the family of Jesus, Jacob's folks who become the lineage of Jesus. So anyhow, back to our story. So she dies giving birth to Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath. That is Bethlehem. Big deal. Bethlehem. Hang on to Bethlehem. Who gets born in Bethlehem? Jesus. Big deal, right? It's also the town of David. And Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on, pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. And then it says, and while Israel lived in the land, Reuben, notice we're switching to Israel now. And while Israel lived in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Interesting. That's all you get on this story. A lot of stuff in the Bible. It's a little bit on the warp side. Okay. One of the things that I've always appreciated about God with regards to the heroes of the Bible is that he shows us the heroes in all their facets, not just their mighty strength, but also in the fact that they had weaknesses. Probably King David is a primary. Here's a man after God's own heart, and he was an adulterer, he's a murderer. He wasn't able to build a temple because he got blood all over his hand. That God shows us the entire picture, unlike the Quran, for instance, it just wants to give us all the glowing background of whoever, Muhammad, No, we're going to see all the factual honesty of God as he represents various people in Scripture. Anyhow, Reuben is going to do this thing, and Israel heard of it, but that's all we know, is that Israel heard of it. We don't have any more information. The conclusion of the chapter is as follows. Now, the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah were Reuben, that's Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, that is Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, that is Leah's servant, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. And so there's the family. There's the 12. Those are the famous ones. That we eventually will have the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, all of that's dating back to this. Okay? And so these 12 tribes, these 12 individual kingdoms that are part of one massive kingdom called the Kingdom of Israel, these are very, very important to our future study. So hang on to them. Their individual lives, most of them is not all that significant, okay? But what we have with regards to the representation of being the lineage through which Jesus will eventually come, very, very important. And by the way, Judah, that's where he's going to come through. Okay. And Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is in Hebron. That's also going to be a big name city in our future studies, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. So this is where, you get that. Now the days of Isaac, now watch it, we're switching from Jacob to Isaac here for just the last verse here, but the days of Isaac were 180 years. This is Jacob's daddy, remember? Okay, so the days of Isaac were 180 years, And Isaac breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Kind of a big deal. And I've used that passage in many funeral talks, that you'll see that Isaac he's going to have a long life. He's going to be a person that is going to be buried in a special place. And more importantly, he is going to have his two sons come together. So family comes together to make sure that the burial is taking place. So at the end of this chapter, we actually had three deaths, didn't we? We had Deborah. Remember, that was Rebecca's nurse. So we've had Deborah, but the two primary deaths are Isaac and Rachel. The favored wife of Jacob dies, and his dad dies. And so there you have chapter 35. Here are the 10 questions again. You got them. Genesis 35. It's a rather complicated clue, but excellent one, Gabriel. You did a good job as always. But Jacob is going to go to Bethel, where he was originally, where he's going to make an altar to the God who has protected him all these years. And then his daddy Isaac is going to die, as well as his favored wife. Time to pray. I've left myself 4 minutes for this, and we needed to leave as much time as possible. Let's just deal with this one first. Yeah, right there. Most of you are aware we've got a Category 4 hurricane that is making landfall almost as we speak here in southern Louisiana. I've got a lot of loved ones, a lot of friends, a lot of church family members that are going to be impacted by this. In fact, Debbie is on here right now, and Debbie lives, I'm not going to point it out because this is a very public thing, but Debbie lives there in Louisiana. But I was supposed to do a revival right here in Abbeville. And we canceled that. They canceled it this weekend because they saw what was coming. They know stuff down there that I don't. And then, boy, they called it right. And this storm's coming right in on top of them. Most of New Orleans has been evacuated, etc. We need to really be concerned and be in prayer for these folks. A lot of them, like Debbie, they've done this before. They're veterans of this. And so they